Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Dale Lakevold and Darrell Racine's play Stretching Hyde. This is a play about a near contemporary 1990s Metis community near Saskatoon in Saskatchewan, Canada. This is part of a play series that follows Misty Lake, which I actually haven't read, but Stretching Hyde is its own standalone piece. But Lakevold and Racine, their play company, which I can't remember the name of off the top of my head. It might be Root Sky Productions. That may be them. Anyway, so their production company is very, very interested in political issues, particularly relating to Indigenous and Métis Canadians. And so this play is exploring issues facing contemporary Métis communities. It explores things like poverty, family relationships, the oppression by law enforcement and game wardens and people like that. But I think the most interesting thing, the central thing for me about this play is the dichotomy between the characters who represent an indigenous ethos of communal support, sharing of resources, appreciation of resources, ethical consumption, etc., versus the character, really single character for the most part, who represents sort of settler colonial capitalism. So, in this play, we have Frank Ducharme, although really the last names kind of don't matter that much here. They never really get mentioned in the play. But Frank is moving back to this community. The Willows is the name of this community. He has gone off and he's gotten an education and become a lawyer. His goal is to come back and to help the people of his community in his capacity as a lawyer. His girlfriend / maybe fiance, Clara, sort of is coming to join him. She is not Métis. She doesn't come from this community, but he wants to bring them back there. Frank's father, Alfred, is a sort of local businessman / wealthy property owner. And initially we're introduced to Alfred by Frank telling Clara how great he is and how he stopped the community from being evicted, how he has provided economic opportunities for everybody, basically just singing Alfred's praises. Within this community, we have four other characters, Sandy and Martin. Sandy sort of works for Alfred doing various jobs and things like that. Martin is 28, but he has some sort of developmental disability or learning disability, something like this. Eugene is a local sort of odd jobs type man and hunter, and Marie is his wife. The direct sort of conflict of the play really centers around someone has shot a deer on Frank's property and the game and just taken the antlers. They've not taken the meat. And so from an indigenous perspective, that's incredibly wasteful. But the bigger problem is that because this deer was poached, the game wardens have come to investigate. And so in order to avoid being charged, maybe having their guns confiscated, maybe even going to jail, the people in this community need to destroy all of their venison. Eugene calls his kids from Frank's house and says, your mother and I can't come home because the game wardens are going to be looking for us. You need to lock the doors. Don't open them for the game wardens, and take all the meat over the course of the night, put it in the fire so that everything burns. Basically, so this is the weird sort of paradox of this, right? In order to stay out of jail and be able to feed his family, Eugene has to have his kids destroy large amounts of food that they otherwise would have depended on eating. And it's because for the Metis, hunting is a traditional way of life. It is subsistence hunting rather than game hunting, rather than sort of hunting for trophies or things like this. Which is part of the reason it's so shocking and confusing to everyone that someone, presumably from this community, would have killed a deer just for its antlers. So they're trying to figure out who did this, less in order to turn that person over to the game wardens and more in order to sort of figure out why someone in their community would do this thing, breaking this fundamental ethical principle. And what we end up sort of developing over the course of the play, we increasingly come to find out that despite what Frank said about his father Alfred being this sort of great pillar of the community, this person who has helped everyone out, etc., he actually kind of betrays the community. What we end up sort of finding out is that Alfred controls the land, and he controls the resources like timber and things like this. And so basically he has enough power that he can force everyone else to his will. So we have this interaction toward the end of the play. Well, slightly after the middle of the play, I guess, in which Alfred is accusing Eugene of having killed the deer just for its antlers, and Sandy and Marie are vehemently disagreeing with this. So Alfred says, Eugene's got a history of taking what he wants. Sandy says, that's bullshit. He keeps most of us fed all winter. Marie says, last year was Horace Leclerc, and the year before it was Norbert Hull. And now it's Eugene. You use all of us for what you want, and it's going to come back on you, Alfred. You wouldn't be doing all of this if you didn't have something to do with it. I know what you've done. Sandy says, exactly. You always make us pay. Alfred says, I think it's the other way around. I've been the bank around here. Now you take that Murdoch place you want. Sandy wants to buy the Murdoch house because Martin accidentally burned down her house. Sandy says, what about it? Alfred says, I got my eye on that place too, and unless you think you can outbid me, I suggest you just sit there and be quiet. You had that old place of yours burnt down by that kid of yours, and last year he froze his foot and you weren't around. And before that, if you remember, he just about shot me. I don't say nothing about that, but all that can change. Sandy says, what are you saying? Alfred says, I'm saying your son can be taken away and put in a home. So before you start opening your mouth and telling me what I know and don't know, you'd better think about it. And it goes on from there. Again, basically we find out that Alfred is this very much capitalistic, controlling, remorseless, empathyless figure. He demands that everyone submit to his will because he has the money and power to force them to. And there are consequences for them if they don't, because he is ruthless and willing to do whatever he has to do to maintain his power and money. Now, this is a contrast to many of the other characters in this community, but ultimately it's sort of Eugene who gives the most direct voice to the indigenous or Metis ethos of communal support, communal support and doing what's right for others. So Eugene wants to get Martin a gun so that he can hunt for himself, so that he can help provide meat, etc., etc. Sandy doesn't want him to have a gun, but that's a whole different story. So Eugene says, basically that he's going to help Martin become a man, essentially, within this cultural context. So he says here, once you have a gun, you'll be able to feed yourself. You'll be a man. Now sit down here and you have one of these beers. I'm going to tell you about having a gun. Stage directions say he opens 2 bottles and gives one to Martin. Now, the reason I didn't go to jail was because I was honest when I went in there. That he could have gone to jail for poaching. The game wardens think that he's the one who killed the deer. And Alfred, we don't know this for sure at this point in the play, but Alfred had turned him in. Martin says, yeah. Eugene says, I told them straight up that I do take the odd deer, but it's for my family. Now, kid, you got to remember, when you own a gun, you don't pick it up unless you're planning on killing something, and you use all the animal. That's how you respect them. And you always take a buck if you can, because it only takes 1 buck to breed all the does. And if you take a doe, you take all the children she could have. You got that? So this is a very fundamental part of indigenous practice when it comes to things like hunting, trapping, fishing, things like this. Respect for the animals that are being harvested. Martin says, yeah. Eugene says, good. Now, if you ever get caught poaching, you make sure you get over to my place and Marie will take that charge. You're going to be a hunter and we can't afford to lose a hunter. This is called sacrifice. This is what taking care of your community is. When you know there's someone looking after the community, you got to protect them at all costs. Marie's been doing that for years, and we've kept the family fed and half this community fed, like you and Sandy. Martin says, I can do that now. Eugene says, that's right. Now, if Frankie did shoot that deer, and if Clara's a good woman, like I think she is, then she'll take that charge. Martin says, Clara's never even shot a gun, and she's scared of dead rabbits. Eugene says, she'll have to take the charge. Now, I don't know if he shot that deer, but even if he did, we can't afford to have him getting charged. This is called loyalty. We've never had a lawyer sticking up for us, and we don't want our only lawyer going to jail. You understand that? So this is an element of, again, an element of indigenous ethics in North America. A sense of dedication to the community, the need to be responsible to the community, which sometimes means sacrifice. Now, in this context, this is a really problematic method because it privileges male hunters over women, and so women take the punishment for men's actions, and that's incredibly problematic in itself. Traditionally, in most indigenous North American communities, there was a much higher degree of gender equity than there is in settler colonial capitalist societies. And that is one of the things that settler colonialists in North America attempted to destroy about indigenous cultures. And unfortunately, in many contexts, they've been quite successful at that. So Eugene gives voice to this ethos. But then Martin really picks this up because he becomes convinced that Frank did shoot the deer, even though he didn't. And even though it seems like Martin actually knows who shot the deer. But Martin goes and he steals the 30-30 from Frank's house because the deer in question was shot with a 30-30. And so Martin is going to go turn himself in, claiming that he shot the deer so that Frank will be off the hook. So Martin basically adopts this ideal of self-sacrifice for the good of the community in order to protect Frank and his legal knowledge on behalf of everyone else in the community. Now, Martin knows, and actually we know this as well, Martin knows that Alfred shot the deer because Martin was there when Alfred killed it. What we find out about Alfred, the other really problematic thing about Alfred, is that so Sandy was orphaned quite young. When Sandy was 13, she was working for Alfred, and he took her to a hotel in Saskatoon, and he got her drunk and raped her. She got pregnant. He attempted to get her an abortion, but it was not successful. And so either because she had Martin when she was 13 or because of the attempted abortion, that's probably why Martin has his developmental disabilities. In theory, Martin and Frank are the only two who do not know that Alfred is Martin's father as a result of rape. Martin does know that, though, and this is actually the other sort of twist at the end, is that Martin is willing to sacrifice himself and his freedom and his ability, maybe even ever to own a gun. He's willing to sacrifice that for Frank because Frank is a lawyer who will serve the community, but he's also willing to sacrifice that for Alfred because Alfred is his dad. And so again, we have this really strong contrast between the greed and the ruthlessness of Alfred, who embodies these capitalist, settler, colonialist values, versus someone like Martin, who is willing to sacrifice himself even for someone who doesn't deserve it, like Alfred.